What's up everyone? Welcome back. Today's gonna be a little bit different. We're gonna talk about gear today. We're gonna talk about lenses, cameras, what I use, when I use, and how I use it. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we talk about what lenses that I use for photography, I'm gonna go up in focal length with every lens that I talk about. And that means we have to start at the wide angle lens. And the wide angle lens that I use is the Sony 16-35mm G series. And now a 16-35mm is one that's in almost every landscape photographer's photo bag. This is the lens that is used to capture the wide landscapes that you ideally think of when you think of landscape photography. And I ended up going with the G series, which is an f4 lens, because of two reasons. One, it's a lot lighter, and two, it's a lot smaller than the 2.8 G Master series. And the reason I did that was when you're hiking, when you're traveling, the weight really adds up fairly quickly in your photo bag. And a lot of the time when I'm shooting landscape photography, I'm not really using a shallow depth of field. I'm using more in the f8 range, f11 range, because I want a lot more things in focus when I'm doing landscape photography. So I'm usually having my camera sitting on a tripod rather as handheld for landscape. And because of that, I'm able to sacrifice a little bit of that light that you can get with the 2.8 with the f4. One of the really cool things you can do with a wide angle lens is create a really cool drastic effect with subjects that are in the foreground. Some things that are a little bit more on the smaller side or don't seem very important can become the center of a photograph due to the wide angle lens. If you shoot it correctly and if you shoot it in a way that emphasizes the subject in the foreground, you can get some really cool effects using a wide angle lens. Now the next lens up is the 50mm. The one that I use is the Sigma 50 1.4. And what's really interesting about the 50mm is it's the closest that a camera can get to what our eyes perceive. And because of that, it's a really good lens for things like portrait or street or lifestyle, even weddings. These are things that we see every day. And a 50mm can capture that really, really well. And I like the 1.4 because this is where you start getting into being able to play with that shallow depth of field. And what I mean by that is when you use a lower aperture closer to the 1.4, 1.8, you get a lot more separation from subject to background. So you kind of remove all of the distractions in the background with a lower aperture. So the 50mm really puts a natural looking proportion to things on a photo. So it's very pleasing to the eye when you observe it because it's very natural to what we see every day. The next step up of my lenses is the 70mm macro lens by Sigma. And this is a really cool lens because the minimum focusing distance for this lens is so much closer than any other lens that I have. And for that reason, it's very good at macro photography. And macro photography is usually something like flowers or plants or insects even. But a lot of the stuff it can be used for is lifestyle photography or commercial or product. A lot of times you need to get a lot closer to get some of those more intimate details of product photography. The other use that I mainly use this for is scanning film negatives. So I'm able to set up my camera and lens with the 70mm macro lens and put my film negatives on a light bed, take images with my camera and the macro lens, and be able to put them on my computer and convert them into positives. And that's how I scan all of my film scans and be able to post-process film after they're developed. So the next step up from the 70mm is the Sigma 85 1.4. And this might be my favorite lens that I always use for any type of photography. It could be street photography, it could be lifestyle, it could be portrait, landscape. I use it all the time. It is probably the most used lens that I have. And the Sigma 85 1.4 is actually one of the sharpest lenses that you can buy for a Sony. It'd be very difficult to find any lens that is actually sharper for a Sony camera than this one. I really enjoy using this one for street photography. To me, I can be really creative doing street photography, isolating subjects, be able to look at how the city looks a little bit different, because cities usually shot on a 35 or a 50mm. So the 85 gives you a little bit different perspective. And I think it helps you be a little bit more creative in how you view street photography and city photography. And the 85 is very similar to the 50 1.4. When you're shooting down at that 1.4, 1.8 aperture, you get that shallow depth of field again with the 85. But what the 85 has an advantage of is compressing the background a little bit more. So it gives you even more separation than the 50mm would. So this next lens, we're starting to get a little bit more into the telephoto area of lenses. We started to a little bit with the 85 and the 70mm, but now we're really getting into it. And this next one is the Sony 70-200 G Master 2 series. And I really enjoy this lens. It's actually one of my favorite landscape lenses, believe it or not, because at the 200 range, you're starting to get a lot more compression in your photos for landscape. And what I mean by that is the background starts becoming a lot closer to the subject or foreground. And with that, you can play a lot more with the creativeness of your photos in landscape. You can start playing with scale. You can start playing with that shallow depth of field, but with distance as a variable. So it's a really cool lens to use for landscape. Now, I went with the G Master 2 because it does go down to 2.8 aperture. It is a little bit heavier and it's a little bit bigger than the F4 G series. And the reason I went with the 2.8, unlike the 16-35mm, is because I use this one sometimes for faster motion. Think sports, marathons. I've taken this to a marathon and used it. So I am willing to sacrifice a little bit of weight here to get more light at the 2.8 aperture rather than the 4. Now for this next lens, we're really into the telephoto range now. And the next one I have is the Sony 200 to 600 millimeter G series. And this one I primarily use for wildlife photography. This is the lens that gets me close to wildlife when they don't want to be close to me. A lot of the time, wildlife runs away. This kind of lets you be at a distance, but still be able to get a lot of detail. And say a bird or a raptor, or even foxes, anything like that, that would normally run away. So this is the lens that I use for those types of photos. Now there isn't much more of a focal length that Sony offers. Sony does offer now they offer a 400 to 800, and the only other lens that is even better than the 200 to 600 is the 600 f4. If anyone has $13,000 they want to give, that I'm right here. But that's not going to happen anytime soon. So that's some of the lenses that I use for my digital camera. I would show you my camera, but that's you guys. I'm recording with it right now. But the camera that I use is the Sony a7R5. I really, really enjoy this camera. It has a lot of features that I use every day. One of my favorites is the autofocus. The autofocus on the a7R5 is AI assisted. And what that means is when I'm out doing wildlife photography, the camera knows if there's a bird or an animal in frame, and it'll focus and keep focus on the eye of the animal, which helps a lot when it comes to capturing things in focus. One of the other things that I use for landscape is the focus stacking feature. So I can set it up to focus on the foreground of a scene, and it will continuously take and shift the focus all the way through the back of the scene. So then when I go home and do post-processing, I can stack those images that the camera took all the way through the focal length. It's a camera that I will probably not give up for a long time. Now for film. This camera is my Olympus OM-2. This is actually the first film camera that I purchased when I started getting back into film. This thing is just a little handheld film camera. It's very lightweight, reasonably, but it's very compact and it's very easy to take places. I have a 50mm 1.4 on here, and as you'll notice when I go to my other film camera, I also have a 50mm lens on that one. I really enjoy shooting film at 50mm because it gives you, again, like we talked about with the other one, that perspective that's very close to the human eye. And I really enjoy that when it comes to shooting film. The funny thing is, this is the camera that the light meter does not work on it. So I have to take my time when I use this one and use the light meter app on my cell phone. But it's a great camera. Love taking this thing everywhere. Now my other film camera is the Nikon F3. And this is the second film camera that I purchased after getting more into film photography. And I've really enjoyed this one. This one is a really cool feature that you can take the eyepiece off of and actually look down into the camera and get hip level shots. It's a really cool feature. I don't use it very often, but it's one of those things that it's kind of cool to pull out every once in a while. But that is a great camera. It's so fun to shoot with, and I just recently purchased it, so I've only put a couple rolls of film through it, but I've gotten some really cool pictures out in Oregon with it, and I can't wait to see what else I get with this one. And I planning on purchasing a 28mm lens for this Nikon before going out to Wyoming later this year. So I'm very, very excited about that. So now on the film. I'm just kidding. Film's probably gonna be a whole nother video out of itself. There's a lot to talk about with film. So we'll save that for another time. But hope you guys enjoyed learning what I shoot with, how I shoot some things, different subjects that I shoot with different focal lengths, different lenses, different cameras. Appreciate you guys sticking around. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time. Thanks, guys.